My name is Emily Davis, and I'm a senior chemistry pre-med major at Mississippi State. Today I want to share with you a little bit about my work as a community health intern. I've worked on many public health initiatives in my role, but the mission behind the Illness and Injury IT Simulation Project is very special to me. As a student recently accepted to medical school, I've spent a lot of time considering what makes an outstanding physician. I once heard it said best that a good physician treats the disease, while a great physician treats the patient who has the disease. Truly, empathy is the quality which can transform the face of healthcare. The IT simulation was created to do just that. It targets future healthcare workers in an effort to increase their understanding of some of the most prevalent health issues in Mississippi, while also increasing their empathy. The IT simulation was implemented during the Rural Medical and Science Scholars Program in a face-to-face format in 2019 and virtually in 2020. Each year, scholars were given an introduction lesson to discuss illnesses, injuries, and the applicability of empathy in medicine. As you can see in Table 1, scholars were then randomly assigned an injury or illness to experience for the next 24 hours. After this time period, the scholars participated in a reflection discussion about their experiences. To measure the students' empathy, growth, and understanding, the Toronto Empathy Questionnaire and a general survey were given before and after the simulation. Examining the data from 2019 and 2020 gives some interesting insight into how well empathy can actually be taught. The first important thing to mention from the general survey is that scholars were asked to define what is an injury, what is an illness, what is empathy. After completing the simulation, we saw scholars were able to give more intuitive responses describing these terms, and they were able to fully distinguish between them. Scholars also reported an increased desire to examine their impact of their actions on other people. And as you can see in Table 2, the majority of students who completed the simulation showed a growth in their belief that empathy could be learned and of its importance. The Toronto Empathy Questionnaire scores also give us some interesting information about the different experiences in 2019 and 2020. Both years did show an increase in empathy scores, with 2019 scholars averaging an increase of 1.76 points, while 2020 scholars averaged an increase of 4.32 points on the empathy scale. This means that 2020 scholars averaged an increase that was double that of 2019 scholars. Even more interestingly, as you can see in graphs 1 and 2, where I was able to plot the probability distributions for the pre- and post-simulation scores, it showed that the 2020 scholars actually had a higher probability of students within the mean increase range. This data originally surprised me, as I expected the 2020 students who experienced the simulation virtually to show less growth than 2019 students. However, further thought led me to realize that 2019 students actually carried out the simulation in a more isolated environment. They were surrounded only by other scholars who understood their assignment, whereas 2020 scholars experienced their injury or illness at home in their communities, with the reactions of individuals completely unaware of their assignment to the health issue. I believe this gave 2020 scholars a much more realistic experience and allowed them to have greater growth in empathy. Another important thing to note is that attitude does impact an individual's perceived empathy growth, but not their actual score. For example, scholars who had extreme viewpoints, such as strongly disagreeing with an empathy statement, maintained this negative viewpoint and perceived themselves as not growing in empathy. Looking at their scores, however, revealed that they not only grew their empathy score, but they grew more than their peers. These key data realizations are important to reshaping the I2 simulation for future use. One avenue for future research would be to develop a hybrid simulation that balances the more positive attitudes found with in-person lessons and discussions, while giving students a chance to step away from the group to have that realistic experience with their injury or illness. I also think it would be very interesting and helpful to have longitudinal studies to examine how scholars use their newfound learnings. Finally, I think it's important to take this incredible tool and expand its use to other healthcare groups and other disciplines. Certainly, one can never have too much empathy in the community. This concludes my presentation for today, but I would like to thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation and learn a little bit about how we can begin to serve as agents of change in Mississippi. Together, we can bring our state to its full potential of health and wellness. Thank you.